July 1945. After nearly 6 years of war, Australian troops are massed off the coast of Borneo, preparing to launch their largest amphibious assault of World War II. The target, Balikpapan, a heavily fortified city bristling with bunkers, artillery, and thousands of Japanese defenders. Cut off from reinforcements and supplies, the Japanese are preparing to fight to the bitter end in the final stages of the Pacific War. But what happens next is one of the greatest stories of sacrifice and individual bravery ever told. The Pacific War is nearing its end, and Japan's empire is retreating. On the shores of Borneo, the oil-rich city of Balikpapan becomes the stage for the largest amphibious landing ever conducted by Australian forces. Over 33,000 troops of the 7th Division prepare to storm the beaches, backed by one of the most devastating naval bombardments of the war. The Japanese defenders, though cut off from reinforcements and supplies, are far from defeated. They've spent years transforming Balikpapan into a fortress, lining its beaches with mines, constructing bunkers into its cliffs, and fortifying its urban center. For the Australians, this won't be just another mission. It will be a brutal and costly fight for every inch of ground. Some would later question whether this battle was even necessary, with Japan's empire already crumbling and its hold on Borneo effectively severed. But in the eyes of the men preparing to land, this wasn't about strategy. It was about survival, liberation, and doing their part to bring the war to its final, bloody conclusion. Balikpapan was the crown jewel of Japanese-controlled Borneo, home to some of the most significant oil fields in Southeast Asia. These fields had fueled Japan's war machine for years, providing the fuel for planes, ships, and tanks. But by 1945, Japan's empire was shrinking. Their supply lines were cut, and the Allies were advancing. To sever Japan's grip on Southeast Asia and reclaim these vital resources, the Allies launched Operation Oboe II, targeting Balikpapan. The operation would be led by Australia's 7th Division, commanded by Major General Edward Milford and supported by US and Australian naval forces under Rear Admiral Royal E. Ingersoll II. But standing in their way was a formidable Japanese force, led by Major General Michio Yamamoto, who had turned Balikpapan into a fortress. The Australians knew they were up against a well-prepared enemy. Over 3,000 Japanese troops were stationed in Balikpapan, fortified with bunkers, minefields, anti-aircraft guns, and hidden artillery. Their defenses stretched from the beaches to the urban center. To prepare for the assault, the Allies launched one of the largest pre-landing bombardments of the Pacific War, a meticulously coordinated effort combining naval and air power. Allied aircraft and warships worked in unison to deliver a relentless assault on Japanese defenses, ensuring no part of Balikpapan's fortifications was spared. The objective was clear: disrupt enemy communications, destroy supply lines, and demoralize Japanese troops, all to pave the way for a more manageable ground invasion. For 2 weeks leading up to the landings, Australian and US ships bombarded Japanese positions day and night in a ceaseless barrage of firepower. This overwhelming operation saw the deployment of over 3,000 tons of bombs, more than 7,000 rockets, and over 38,000 shells. Allied aircraft conducted more than 1,000 sorties, relentlessly strafing and bombing key enemy positions to weaken their defenses. On July 1st, 1945, the assault was ready. The 7th Division, reinforced with engineers, artillery units, and support troops, was divided into 3 main task forces. Each had a specific objective to ensure a coordinated attack across land, sea, and air. At 8:15 a.m., Under the cover of naval and aerial bombardments, the first wave of Australian troops landed on Green Beach near Clandestin, a heavily fortified area. The 18th Brigade, led by Brigadier Frederick Oliver Chilton, spearheaded the assault. The Japanese defenders had prepared well. The Australian troops faced withering machine gun fire, artillery barrages, and a labyrinth of bunkers and defenses as they landed on Balikpapan's shores. Casualties began to mount almost immediately, and the true horrors of battle unfolded. The air was thick with gunfire and explosions as Australian troops pressed forward. Amid this deadly chaos, individuals rose to meet the moment with extraordinary acts of valor. Among them was Captain Raymond Jesse Alsop, a man who faced death not with a weapon in hand, but with bandages and medicine, driven by a relentless duty to save lives. During the intense initial phases of the landings at Balikpapan, Captain Raymond Jesse Alsop, a medical officer with the 2nd 5th Commando Squadron, demonstrated extraordinary courage and selflessness. As his comrades advanced, they were caught in open ground by intense enemy fire, by no less than 6 machine gun positions. When the section commanding officer and a trooper were hit and pinned down, Alsop did not hesitate to push forward to their aid. After treating the officer and sending him back to safety, Alsop proceeded to drag the trooper out of the line of fire. Unfortunately, the trooper was hit again, and Alsop himself was wounded on his left thigh. Despite this, Alsop carried water to the dying trooper for over 1 hour, and with no regard for his own safety. He repeatedly ventured into open ground, swept by machine gun fire, to assist soldiers who were critically injured. Each time he completed a rescue, he returned to the line, risking his life to save another. Tragically, during one such attempt, Alsop was mortally wounded. Even as his injuries took their toll, he continued his efforts to care for the men around him. His commanding officer would later write, "I have never known a unit medical officer to equal him, nor have I ever known a braver man." Alsop's sacrifice saved the lives of at least 3 men at the cost of his own. His actions inspired those who fought alongside him and exemplified the highest ideals of service and humanity. In 2017, more than 7 decades after his death, Alsop's heroism was formally recognized when his mention in dispatches was upgraded to the Star of Gallantry, one of Australia's highest honors for battlefield valor. His story is a poignant reminder of the critical role played by medical personnel in war. Back at the beaches of Balikpapan, Australian sappers, engineers tasked with clearing obstacles, worked tirelessly under fire to dismantle mines and barbed wire. Casualties were heavy, but the Australians pushed forward, securing a foothold on the beach. With the beaches now secured, the battle moved inland, and the true complexity of the operation became apparent. The Japanese had heavily fortified the urban areas, turning every building into a stronghold. The Australians, unused to urban combat in the Pacific, had to adapt quickly. The 25th Brigade, led by Brigadier Kenneth Ether, took the lead in clearing the city. Tanks from the 2nd/9th Armored Regiment provided critical support, using their firepower to neutralize bunkers and machine gun nests. The Australians also deployed flamethrowers and satchel charges to clear Japanese positions. House-to-house combat was grueling, with every corner presenting a potential ambush. The 2nd 16th Battalion distinguished itself in these operations, showcasing exceptional discipline and tactical precision. By July 3rd, Australian forces had captured much of Balikpapan, but the Japanese weren't ready to surrender. Retreating into the surrounding jungle, they launched guerrilla attacks, ambushing supply lines and harassing Allied troops. The Australians responded with coordinated patrols and airstrikes, systematically rooting out remaining pockets of resistance. By July 21st, organized Japanese resistance had collapsed. Major General Yamamoto's forces suffered over 2,000 killed, with the remaining captured or missing. Following the collapse of organized Japanese resistance, the Australian forces initiated surrender negotiations through psychological operations. They conducted leaflet drops over Japanese positions, detailing specific instructions for establishing communication. These leaflets informed the Japanese command of the designated time to monitor their radios, the precise frequencies to use, and the assigned call sign for contact. In a display of characteristic Australian humour, the call sign assigned to the Japanese headquarters was drongo, a colloquial term in Australian English meaning idiot or fool. Unaware of the term's derogatory connotation, the Japanese complied with the instructions, leading to successful radio communication. This clever use of language not only facilitated the surrender process, but also provided a subtle morale boost to the Australian troops, who appreciated the ironic undertone. The initial radio contact paved the way for face-to-face meetings. Two Japanese soldiers, blindfolded to maintain operational security, were escorted to an Australian advanced headquarters to formalize the surrender arrangements. This methodical approach ensured a smooth transition and minimized further casualties on both sides. The victory at Balikpapan was total. The Australians had neutralized Japan's last stronghold in Borneo, effectively ending their presence in the region. Over 229 Australian soldiers were killed, and 634 were wounded in the campaign. But the cost wasn't just measured in lives. The Japanese occupation had left thousands of civilians and prisoners of war in dire conditions. Australian troops liberated these survivors, bringing an end to years of suffering. With Balikpapan secure, the Allies reclaimed vital oil fields and cut off one of Japan's last major resource hubs. And just a matter of weeks later, the Russians had entered the Pacific War in the north. Combined with the use of the atomic bombs, Japan surrendered. Following the cessation of hostilities in August 1945, Australian forces remained in Borneo to assist with recovery efforts and the restoration of civil order. Their immediate priorities included the liberation and care of Allied prisoners of war and civilian internees, many of whom had endured severe hardships under Japanese captivity. Australian troops facilitated the provision of medical care, nourishment, and repatriation for these individuals, ensuring their safe return home. In addition to humanitarian efforts, Australian forces played a crucial role in re-establishing local governance and rebuilding infrastructure. They worked to restore essential services, such as water supply and healthcare, and assisted in rebuilding oil facilities and other damaged infrastructure. Martial law was initially imposed to maintain order, but over time, civil administration was reinstated under the British Borneo Civil Affairs Unit. Australian forces generally began withdrawing from Borneo in late 1945, with the majority having left by early 1946. Their efforts during this transitional period were instrumental in stabilizing the region and facilitating a return to normalcy for its inhabitants. The Battle of Balikpapan was a testament to the courage and determination of the Australian 7th Division and the last major Australian ground operation of the Second World War. Against formidable defences and treacherous conditions, they triumphed, liberating a region and crippling an empire. Today, their sacrifices are remembered not just in history books, but in the lives they saved and the freedom they restored. Balikpapan's oil may no longer fuel a war, but its story fuels our understanding of the cost and the necessity of peace. Thank you for watching. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales of bravery and resilience from history's greatest battles.